My name is Irene Tsuyuki. So that'll give the maiden name and all that. And I was born in Vancouver on Powell Street. I think it was 300 block. Now I'm not too sure, but it was either 200 or 300 block. And I had two sets of parents, my biological parents and adopted parents. So I became adopted as soon as my mother died after she had my brother. And very fortunately, my adopted parents were, my adopted father was blood related to me. So actually he was my great uncle. And they had no children, so therefore we were both adopted. And unfortunately my brother died when he was only 3 months old. So I became the only child. And by other people, I guess I was spoiled. And some of them called me princess. And but when I look back, my parents were very, very good parents. My father had retail and repair shoe store, and not until I was about 11 or 12 that I started to take a little interest in the store. And I remember I think it must have been just before the war, I was asked to help at Christmas because they were busy. And so my father said, you could come in and you can help. And he taught me how to use the cash register and how to sell different types of shoes. And I found it quite interesting. And of course, I was ordered to wear certain kind of shoes because they were better for my feet. And so I knew all this. And so all I had to do was just go into detail and just learn the different qualities of shoes. So I don't know how long, probably a week or 10 days just before Christmas, I helped, and I really enjoyed it. That's one of the better memories of those days, because other than that, it was a very kind of a uneventful, boring daily routine. Go to public school, come home, have a bite to eat, then go to Japanese school, study, come home, and what did I do? Probably I would have done a little bit of homework until my mother came home, and then she would cook supper and have supper, and my bedtime was around 8 o'clock. And so this went on daily. And so when I first helped in the store, well, I all of a sudden came in contact with different people. And so I did my piece, and if they bought the shoes, I felt so good. So at the end of the days I helped, my father gave me $11. Now, $11 in 1940 or 41. Now that was a lot of money when you think about it. Well, my mother, she came as a picture bride, but my father, I I think it must have had something to do with he was from a farm, and he was not the eldest son. I think my grandfather was the eldest son. So, as long as the eldest son takes over, well, then the rest of them, they could do as they please. And he probably heard from different sources about, oh, there's countries out there that, you know, you could make a lot of money. So perhaps that was the reason. But, you know, from Kanagawa prefecture, there weren't that many immigrants, mostly from the southern prefectures. So I think that's the reason why when the two of them found out that they were from the same prefecture, they were also from a very close village. Wow, they really hit it off. Yeah. See, because my mother was quite strict, I was not allowed to participate in a lot of things. It was more to do with a daily routine, and so this is the reason why when I worked for a short while in my dad's store, that was a real treat for me. I guess if I had siblings, I would have had a different type of life, but it was a very, very lonely childhood for me. Every night I used to pray to God that maybe I could have a sister or a brother, just like that. I don't know how or where or when, but I thought if I ask enough, maybe I'll get one. My dad was in the hospital. He was in a diabetic coma, and we had to rush him into Vancouver General. So he was there when Pearl Harbor happened, and that was pretty traumatic because I still remember, my mother went to see him just shortly after. Probably then, not so much of that day, but the following day. And he said, I gotta get out of here. And he was not ready to go home, but he said, I gotta get out of here. He says, everybody is against me. And he said, all of a sudden, he said, the nurses, even the doctors, except for the Japanese doctor, he says, everybody, they hardly talk to me anymore, and they're just treating me like a nothing. So he said, I want to go home, and he asked the doctor if he could go home, and he understood. So he says, yeah, you could go home, but you got to do all these things. So, we knew that the Japanese school was going to be closed, but that was put aside just at that moment because, it was more important for my dad to come home, and then, Mother had to really look after him, and I did too. I took part in it also. My school life in Strathcona was, I would say, very good. I enjoyed it. And especially the last year, 1942, because we were allowed to stay till the end of the evacuation, which was around October, that I was able to graduate grade 8. My mother had requested, she was very outspoken, and even in her bad English, she just went to the commission and said, look, my husband is sick. It's just myself and my daughter, and we have to still pack our things. We have to I have to clean up the business. So, and my husband is bedridden, so I would like to stay here as long as possible. And he said, okay, we'll put you in the last group to go.
Okay.
So we were very, very lucky, and I was very lucky that I was able to finish grade 8. But I have to tell you about our principal, Mr. Patterson. He was a wonderful, wonderful man. Don't think I've ever seen anybody who was so kind, thoughtful, and I think he had a liking to the Japanese, because our school was mainly of Japanese and Chinese majority, and there were other nationalities. So our slogan was school with many nationalities but one flag, and it was true. So anyways, Mr. Patterson was, so I was about the only one left in the classroom. And he was really so good to me that I haven't ever forgotten that. So I was able to finish my school years there with a very happy feeling, even though things were going to change. My parents decided that whatever we couldn't, they had quite a bit of furniture, So they decided to store them, and the company that they stored was Bowman's Storage Company. I don't know if it's still in existence or not, but it was for many, many years afterwards. So they stored everything there and just took whatever we were allowed to take. But my mother, I guess, said, we have to take the piano because my daughter's she's been taking piano lessons, so we're taking the piano instead of taking some other things. So they allowed us to take the piano, So we had the piano in that small cubby hole of ours. So piano's there, table and 3 chairs was here, and right next to that, the piano, there's hardly maybe a few inches space, then their double bed, and right next to it was my single bed. I don't know how we ever did it for 4 years. No privacy, nothing. But anyways, so I think my mother was pretty feisty. We took the train from Vancouver to Hope, from Hope to the camp on a truck with all the stuff. But when we were at the train station in Vancouver, I don't know what the RCMP said to her, but she was very upset. Probably they were not very nice. And she was beside herself, and I think she said a few things to him. And she also, said to me, and she was kind of half swearing in Japanese. And he says, she said, "Baka ni shiteru," He said, insulting me. So that's the only thing I remember. and arriving at Tashme on this truck. Oh my gosh! And of course, my dad was in the temporary hospital there. Yeah. So he probably he was pretty worried about what was happening, and once we got there, I guess he felt a little bit more relieved. But then he was having heart problems, so it was all that stress. Because diabetes by itself, I mean, he was taking insulin, so it would have been okay. But, the stress brought on the complication immediately. Everything was stored, and I don't think there was anybody who had the idea that we were going to be, we weren't coming back. Let's put it this way. They probably thought that, oh, yeah, maybe we're going away for 2-3 weeks. I think this is the assumption that they all had. How else would you think? Nobody did anything wrong, and nobody knew exactly what was happening, just to know that we were being evacuated, getting away from the coast. But we thought, oh well, we'll be able to come back. And a lot of people had left their things intact. Our room was right on the corner. Now, there was a main hallway from one end of the barn to the other end, which was around approximately 200 feet long. And both sides were rooms, separated only by shiplap walls. And it wasn't right up to the ceiling either, so there was opening. No privacy. You could hear your next door neighbor. Sometimes, if they're talking, yeah, you could kind of, hear a bit. Absolutely no privacy. And then the other end, there was a communal kitchen. So for us, on the other side of it, we had to walk that length back and forth, back and forth. If you forgot something, then you go back and get it. And so they had 5 or 6 these wood burning stoves, and that's what so we had to have shifts. Who's going to cook certain time and that. And they had the 2 sinks, both sides. But at least they had running water. I think that I had new friends in the camp, and I more or less started to concentrate on them. So I didn't really miss anybody in particular. It was okay because everybody stuck together, and it was a community. Everybody worked hard in order to get through it. So it was so they used to have annual concerts. They used to have Japanese movies because somebody came, and this person that was involved in it, he brought the films, and they would have a movie night so the older people could enjoy. And they used to have sports. So I think that everybody worked hard at improving the conditions and make the best of it. Let's put it this way. Around the time when the war came to an end, and of course then they had to give us the ultimatum, and I think by that time everybody knew that we had nowhere to go back to. So by the time that 1945 and the war finished, and by that time I think quite a number of them had already left. So whoever that was left were the ones who were undecided, and probably they were all stressed. Some of them wanted to stay in Canada. The others, no, we want to go. Probably the parents wanted to go. They didn't want anything to do with Canada anymore. The kids said, no, we don't want to go to Japan. We don't know what it's like. That's not our country. So I think a lot of them split. It was much similar to our case too, because of my dad's health. there was only one choice, and to go to Japan, where there was house to go to, and with relatives being farmers, he thought, well, don't think we'll starve. And he thought, well, I'll grow some vegetables, and then we just have to buy some fish, which wouldn't be too expensive. So that's the reason why I think his health just turned right around, and he became very healthy. I think he was probably the healthiest in those years in Japan until he had the accident. Yeah.
Really?
I can't remember him saying anything about insulin, because I don't think he was even taking insulin. His diabetes was just, he lost all that extra weight. So at times I thought he looked a little bit scrawny,
Yeah.
But he was exercising, working with the soil. That's the best thing you could do. When we left Vancouver, we left on the U.S. Ship, and there was a bunch of us, also the last group to go, and I can remember we were standing in the bow of the boat, and because it was in August, so the weather was fairly nice, and we're coming close to the Lionsgate Bridge, and we started to kind of look at each other, and as we were going under it, all of us, we started, tears were rolling down our cheeks, and we were actually just bawling our heads off, because we didn't know. Maybe it might be the last time we see the bridge. Nobody knew what was going to happen. But we knew that we're leaving the country. That was really sad. And it just felt like, okay, that's it. And I thought, okay, gee, there's not going to be any ties to Canada. But you know what? What I packed in my suitcase, most important, my photos, my albums, and my school certificates, report cards, and that. Those were very important to me, because I think I probably felt the ties to Canada, and that someday I'll be coming back. Well, because we were leaving, the government had written a check for the proceeds from the sale of his property and all that. To this day, I don't know how much it was. To this day, I don't know whether he cashed the check or not. But when he received that, before we left, he cried. It's the first time I ever saw my father cry. Tears were just rolling down his cheeks, and he said, "What an insult," he said. And he just looked at the check. He never took his eyes off it. So he must have been looking at how much he got. And I didn't dare ask him how much it was. And he says, "I'll never," he says, "cash the check. If I cash it, that means I accept. There's no way," he says, "I am not good." So I don't think he cashed it. I can't prove it, but he was adamant that he's not going to cash it. But that's the only time that I saw him cry. Now, when we first got there in 1946, as soon as we arrived and we set foot on the land, my dad turned to me and said, now, he says, as soon as you are able to go back to Canada, you do that. And I was really shocked because here I was there with them because I figured I'm the only child. And I had this feeling that I'll never be able to have any independence, so to speak. So my dad saying that to me was a welcoming but a very, very surprising shock. And I thought, oh my gosh, it must have taken an awful effort for him to say that to me. But I think what he thought was, well, once I come back here, then there'll be an opportunity for them to come back here too. My number one priority was to support my parents because my dad couldn't work. So my uncle, who was living close by, actually he was educated at UBC and he had a master's in engineering, and he thought that he was going to spend his life here. But in those days, the Japanese were not allowed any type of professional job. So he had to go back to Japan, and he worked for the Ford company. So he's quite happy because he was able to speak English. And he found a job for me with a Japanese company. That was not my choice, but he said that you're going in as a translator. And I thought to myself, okay, I'm bilingual, so I should be manage okay. I think I might have lasted for, can't remember, a couple months, or it wasn't very long. I had to get out of there. Number one, I felt very claustrophobic, and in the office nobody spoke any English, and I didn't get this welcome feeling because they knew who I was. I'm a foreign national. And so I started to keep in touch with the embassy. And I, wanted to make sure that as soon as permission was granted, then I applied, which was April 1949. So I went through all that. I had to have a sponsor. And so my dad says, I'll write to my friend Tsuyuki. So that's how everything just fell into place. My in-laws, they were in that East Lillooet first, and then as soon as they were allowed to go back and forth to Lillooet, well, they bought, I think they bought about 400 acres of land, and they grew field tomatoes. So they had good income out of that. And they have been there ever since 42. That's where they evacuated on their own. So they had to have $1,500 or $1,600 in cash because it's self-supporting. Government didn't have to do a thing. So when I got there, they were living in that big house, and so they had a room upstairs for me, and so I met my husband for the first time since 1941. I think it was 1941, the year the war started. But that summer, my mother gave me permission to go and spend 2-3 days over at their farm in Haney, because you see, his sister and I were very, very good friends. And so, I was just so happy, And I met my husband there because, as a family, we were eating together and that. And I was so shy that I told my sister-in-law, I says, could we eat in the living room? Because I don't want to eat with your brothers, And so we had a little table in the living room, and we just the two of us had dinner there. I was that shy, and so that's the last time I saw him until 1949 when I came back. Suddenly, I'm like, 22, and he was going on 24.
Wow.
And we just hit it off just like that. I think in his situation it was different from mine, because when his dad told him, he says, now you're the eldest of the sons, he says, never mind school, education, he says, you help me on the farm. So he knew right there and then that, okay, well, for I don't know how many years, his life was sort of under rule. And probably he decided that, guess I'll go into farming. So, and seeing that his 3 brothers all became professionals.
They did?
Yeah. So the next brother, he had a PhD in biochemistry. So he was with the Canadian fisheries until retirement. And the other 2 brothers became dentists. So he never ever mentioned it, but I think I just had this feeling that he felt shortchanged. Everybody decided to leave. So the whole property was, had I think 5 different people involved in it. My father-in-law and they were all relatives. So they sold the whole thing and they split it. And so whatever money that we had, then we all moved back to the coast. So that was in 1951, March. I'll never forget. I was pregnant. I had absolutely no clue. I didn't know a plant from a weed. But I learned. Yeah, he was very patient, and he never ever told me to hurry up and come to work or this and that. Just left it up to me. Then of course the babies started coming, every 2 years. And so I look after the babies, and then when when they're sleeping, I go to the greenhouse and work a bit. I go back to the house, and you can do that when you're young. He only had grade 11 education, me too, but we worked hard. We worked hard for 10 years before we got our new house. When I got my new house, I tell you, Suzanne, I thought I had a palace, particularly the bathroom. I couldn't get over. I couldn't get over it. You know, for 10 years, you know, when you don't have it and you only have outhouse, every time I went in there, I'm going, oh my gosh, you know, what a nice room. I think it took me about a year before I got back to normal thinking. That bathroom is just part of the house. Couldn't have been any better. He was a good man. Mind you, doesn't mean that he didn't have some not good qualities, but you know what? That's trivial. I mean, the most important, he was a good worker, he was a good provider, he was good to the kids, he was also very good to people who needed help. So if somebody wanted to start up a business farming, if he knew them, he'll help them out. I didn't realize this, you know, until his funeral, because I thought to myself, where did all these people come from? Because we had, I think there was about 400 or 500 people that showed up. I don't know where because the main part was just full up. 1989, I think that was the first one. He had a mild stroke, but he came out of it. And then he had a big one in 96. So 89, when he had that mild stroke, we thought, okay, I think maybe we should sort of slow down and maybe get out of it. And our son was into it, so he says, well, he could take over. So he started, and he was very successful, you know, because he had a 100% exposure on the 140th. So he put up his retail section there, and used the greenhouses for the baskets, and did very, very well. Oh, he really had a very wide clientele. After he passed away, I just thought to myself, now I gotta really look after myself, because if I don't, I'm a burden to everybody else. So I have to, that's number one, my priority, to look after myself. And if my body is healthy, mentally I'll be healthy. That goes together. So you have to really keep your body in good shape. You can only do it yourself. Nobody else can do it for you. You know how you feel, and that you know that if you have health, then you have everything. You have $1 million and you don't have health, got nothing. The only regret is that I wasn't able to get my parents back. And it was probably, if my dad didn't have that accident, he would have been able to come back. Yeah. My story came up because, not so much for myself, because I didn't really understand the root of the problem at that time. I did it because of my parents, because they never had the opportunity to at least be aware that redress had started, and that they were going towards the acknowledgement from the government. They never had that opportunity because they had passed away before that. So I wanted to tell the story based on their kind of history. I have spoken to some of my grandkids. Some are more receptive about it. Others, maybe they don't have too much interest, or maybe they're not old enough. They have to be old enough to understand. And so I would just pass on to them that life is not ice cream and candies and, sweets, and if you have some interruption, some problems, you have to keep going. Don't let it set you back, and you have to keep plugging along, and it will take you to your destination. I would like to be remembered as being a person who has had a very good life with a lot of ups and downs, but my last years of my life has been very happy and healthy, and being able to pass that on to other people, my friends, or anybody who's willing to listen. I would like to be, remembered as that.